Hi, and my name is Malik Bint Nicola, and this is Basic Thread Woven Buttons. Thread woven buttons have been around since pre-1500s. You see them, from my own research, I've seen them in England, most of other parts of Germany, through the Middle Eastern countries. I haven't done much research on them through the Asian countries, but there are plenty of different versions of thread woven buttons throughout the Middle Ages, Renaissance. So let's get started. Here's some examples that you'll see of the thread woven buttons that I've done. This is nowhere near how many I've done. I've done hundreds of these for different people. These basic ones, you can do them in multicolor or single color. The warps. This video will show you how to do single color. These are the buttons, the cores that I use. I use 12 millimeter because that's what I started with. That's what I like. I have done other sizes. I have a friend who does 14 millimeter because it's just better for his fingers. The thread I'm using right now is pearl cotton. Again, it's just what I prefer. I don't prefer using stranded. For this bead in particular, I'm doing two yard strands of thread. For a single color warp, you want an odd number of warps. So for this one, I did 25. You'll have a little time where your thread gets messed up, but you just kind of have to work it through. So. When the bead starts getting a little full with threads, you don't have to go in order. You can go across. You can move the threads around to make more space. You just need to make sure you have, and for a single warp, you need to have an odd number. And when you're done, you just pull it through and pull your needle out. There you go. So it's all ready now to be woven. As I mentioned before, I typically work in yard increments, but you can work with more or less. It just depends on how long your tails are. For two colored, I'd probably go at least 24 inches. So to start the weft, you take the thread and you pull it through so that you have your tail. And then you just pick one of the threads. I spend way too much time making my tails even. Just pick one of the warps and go underneath it. For needles, I've seen both people do sharps and blunts. I typically like sharps, but I know there are people who don't like blunts. At this point, you will end up, like, that tail can get in the way. Once you have a couple rows done, it becomes much easier not to get the tail messed up anymore. So you just continue going around the button. For tension, you can't... If you pull too tightly at this point, you'll just pull the threads too far. You just kind of have to you want them just on the edge of where the hole is. And you don't want to pull them too tight. You just want them to be like taut. And that's pretty much how it is throughout the entirety of the button. You just want it. It's like knitting. When you knit, you want it to be tight on the needle, but you don't want it too tight where it gets bunched up. So it's the same process. You just want it tight enough. So the first few buttons you make, it might be either too loose or too tight. It's just something that takes practice. And as you see, I'm getting closer to where I started. And with the single color, you don't have to worry about skipping any lines or anything. It will just going over, under, will continue making the pattern. For more than one color, you will end up having what looks like a seam on the back, which I can do a video if more people want to see how to actually do it. I know I have images that show what that seam looks like. Basically, you just skip one, and then it rotates it. At first, you'll start wondering if your weft is too loose, and as you continue going through and doing the button, it actually, you pull, again, it's just like that when I was talking about the knitting, you slightly pull up. You can use your needle as like a shuttle to push those threads up a bit. There's some wiggle room at the end. You'll see I'll end up playing with the button just to kind of, my fingers just to move the threads. So let's get through and let's get the button mostly done. For the colors, if you want a black button with dots of white like I'm doing here, you want your main color to be the weft or the thread that you're weaving. The dots show up just more as a background color. This is where I actually knotted my thread. So now that's all fixed. When I'm working, when I was recording, this is actually not how I normally sit, so I keep moving as you see, and having to readjust myself. I do this usually while watching TV on the couch, so I sit back in my chair, and I'm doing this really close to my nose, so it was a little uncomfortable to do. But for me, it takes me about 15 to 20 minutes to make one of these at a time, when I'm all comfortable in my seat. As you start seeing now, as I keep going, I'm pulling out that thread up. It is shifting it, so now it's filling in any space. There's sometimes where your warps will get a little loose, especially where like the tails, the last ones were. You can the first and the last one that you did, you can take the whites and just kind of tug them a little bit, and that should tighten those warps up. You can at this point flip and sew the opposite and weave the opposite direction. I don't. I always go right to left. That's just personal preference. You probably could do left to right. See right there, I kind of readjusted some of those threads just to so they so they don't bunch up. You can end up, if you don't space those warps correctly, where like some of the dots are way wider or longer than others, and which can cause it doesn't really cause an issue. You just have to rearrange things. Again, they're threads. You can move them around. So now, as you see, we're starting to get to the end. There is no real point where you are like, okay, this is the end. You keep going, at least for me, I keep going until I can't physically get my needle through it. Sometimes it even means like I might miss part of the thread or only get through half the thread. But no, I go until I can't physically, which is another reason why it's really nice to do it really close to your face so you can see and really pick those threads out. See right here, I stop. It's taking more time to really dig that thread out. Sorry about being out of focus. Alright. Well, there. I'm done. So to finish it, you just take the thread and thread it back through. And give it a tug. And there we go. And I wasn't happy with how that last little line stuff, so I kind of moved it down so that way it was an easier. It was not so bunched up. These are absolutely fantastic to make and use. They survive really well in the dryer and the washer. I've had no issue. The only thing that I have found that destroys them are my dog. My dog absolutely loves to eat them. So there you go. Here is some buns that I have photos of that I've taken. As you see, you can do different sizes, even different shapes. You can do some different fun patterns with them. There's even a triple thread. So now let's talk about what happens, how to attach them and when it's too loose. Here's an example of what happens if you don't have enough warps. It doesn't weave real tightly, so then you can kind of pull it apart. Now there are two ways to attach these. I typically use these really large darning needles just because the amount of thread I use. It's just a personal preference. The first way I'm going to show you is with this loose button. I'm going to take one of those tails and actually sew it back through the hole. This is the style that I've typically seen in more Elizabethan. And what they do is they put like a little pearl through these threads so that when you sew it down and up, you have the button, and then covering that hole is a little pearl. So now you have your tail ends to attach for as the shank. Depending on what your thread is and how many, it can be kind of a pain to get all of them through. I thread both sets of threads at the same time, and then put both needles through the fabric. This is just, again, a personal preference. I find that if you do it one at a time, you can accidentally, because, you know, that thread at the end is, I've done 3 to like 5 inches. It's pretty easy not realizing it, and you accidentally pull it out. So I typically, at this point, I thread both needles and put them through together. See, like, you could even still pull it. It's not really, you don't have the longest threads, which, again, if you want to add more length to them, it's just more thread you have to weave. You just have to be careful not to knot it. So let's bring out some lovely yellow duck. So I put one through, and I always leave a little gap of thread between my needles, just so that way it has something to hold on. It has something to attach to. So at this point, you just pull the threads through, and then on the back, you just knot them together. And there you go. There's how to do it with the hole facing up. When I do mine, I knot it, and then I actually put a little bit of like fray check on it to hold it together, so that knot doesn't come out. These actually are really, you can actually cut the threads for the shanks and put a little bit of like a glue. I've used super glue. I've used fray check, kind of to hold it in place. So if you ever have to replace the shanks, like you're like, oh, I want to use these on something else, or I need to replace something, you can absolutely just cut those threads and sew it with a normal thread and needle. So now we just pop them right back through. And you'll see, if I move my hand forward, what I was talking about, where I just knot these together real quick. And there we go. That's how to do it from using both the shanks on the side. And you can do them vertically or horizontally. Let me untie this one because I actually want to use this again. Alright. I hope you enjoyed it, my video, and if you want more information on how to make these, I will be open to making more videos on how to do the multicolored ones and the loops. Alright. Thank you so much.